Two separate 4-game slates on tap for today across MLB DFS, and you know what that means. We've got ourselves a split slate podcast for today on the Solo Shot. We are discussing both the early only and the main slates, getting you set with 2 pitchers and 2 stacks for both those offerings. So let's dive on in and sort this all out. Welcome on into the Solo Shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to dissect both of those slates. The early only slate is 4 games. It locks at 135. Main slate is also 4 games. That one locks at 710. We'll do this in the same order as always, where I will do the main slate first. The reasoning behind that is that if you're listening to this at 1:36, you don't care about the early-only slate and want to make this easier for people listening later in the day. So if you are tuning in and we're getting closer to lock for the early-only slate, go to the episode description. You can find that on numberFire, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, and look for a timestamp. I'll have a timestamp within the description that says where the early-only slate analysis begins, and then if you want to, come back and check out the main slate after that. The afternoon stream for today will be focusing, of course, just on the main slate. That is at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook pages, so make sure you are subscribed in those areas to come on in, ask us questions. We can talk one-offs, stacks, pitchers, value plays, whatever it may be, we can chat right there. We also have a new UFC podcast with Austin Swain that has already been posted, breaking down this weekend's card. That is on Saturday. A Tour Championship podcast is ready for PGA DFS as well. Brandon Gadula and me, we talked about that. That does not lock until tomorrow because it is Labor Day weekend. So the golf event starting on Friday as opposed to Thursday. You can still check that out. Tom Vecchio also has the Daily ISO and the Daily Deke already uploaded for today's slate. So 4 separate DFS podcasts for today. And you can also go back and check out the PGA DFS podcast as well. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio. I think we're on radio.com, like a bunch of places. Why not? Subscribe there. And if you like what you hear, leave a rating and review as well. Before we check out the main slate, football is back, and FanDuel is giving you a new way to play fantasy football this season with its best ball contests. Unlike standard season-long fantasy football, where you have to constantly make changes to your starting lineup and roster, you only have to focus on one thing and one thing only, the draft. All you have to do is draft a 20-player team, and you are done. Each week, your top-scoring players automatically start and will count toward your season total. The team with the most points at the end of the season wins. No setting your lineup, no waivers, no trades, just draft. It is the easiest way to play season-long fantasy football. For more details, visit FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. Pitching preview for this main slate. I forgot to do the weather, so I guess we'll do weather first. Not really any weather notes here, so I guess that's probably why I skipped over it. I would say that the warmest park on the slate is in Los Angeles for the Angels and the Padres, so slight upgrade to the park relative to where it usually is. That's the only weather note for today. Now, the pitching preview for the main slate. Clayton Kershaw is the highest salaried pitcher on FanDuel. He checks in at $10,900. Mike Clevenger making his Padres debut. He is $9,400. And then Taijuan Walker is $92,000. Got Dylan Cease, Andrew Heaney, and Danny Duffy as the others at $8,000 or higher. And to me, at least, for this main slate, it is a no-brainer that Clayton Kershaw is the top pitcher of the night because he checks every single box that you want out of your starting pitcher. He has been awesome so far this year. His velocity has been up from where it was last year, and that is sustained. Start by start, the velocity has still been there for Clayton Kershaw, and that has translated well into results. He has a 2.92 skill interactive ERA with a 30% strikeout rate and a 4% walk rate. So the peripherals are there, the velocity are there. The check 1 and check 2. We can also check the box that Kershaw is at home. We always want that, and it's a plus matchup. The Diamondbacks were not great against lefties to begin with, but now they've traded Starling Marte to the Marlins. That is one less competent right-handed batter to give Kershaw troubles. And once you take Marte off the active roster, they have a 61 WRC plus against lefties this year. They don't strike out a ton, but it's also just a 6% walk rate, and Kershaw has shown he can generate his own upside. He had 11 strikeouts 2 starts ago. Kershaw is at home for just the second time this year, so although the peripherals have been very good, it's possible they get better as things balance out and he plays more games at home. So I think tonight is a great night for single entry tournaments on FanDuel. And if I'm doing a single entry tournament, Clayton Kershaw will be the pitcher in that slot. If it's a cash game, it's the exact same thing. Clayton Kershaw is a set it and forget it type of pitcher for tonight's main slate. The second pitcher is a lot riskier, and that's part of why I am just kind of locking in Clayton Kershaw as my top pitcher and leaning towards single entry. You could go Mike Clevenger, but he's facing a low strikeout team, and his effectiveness hasn't been all that great this year. So I'm actually looking at the other side of that game because we're taking a tournament-centric focus to this, and Kershaw is our guy for cash games. And the guy I like for tournaments there is Andrew Heaney at $8,500. Heaney is facing the Padres, and that's a really tough assignment. They have a 121 WRC plus against lefties and make a ton of hard contact. But they also have a lot of left-handed batters thinking about their lineup, and they also just lost Will Myers to the injured list. So that is one less really good righty to have in there. And Heaney can get strikeouts. He's a 27% strikeout rate this year with a 13.3% swinging strike rate. He had 10 strikeouts his last time out. Now, that was against a high strikeout, not very good Mariners team, so I'm not expecting Heaney to do that once again, but he at least has a path to a ceiling, and that's valuable when we are ignoring floor and focusing on this just-made tournament perspective. So Heaney could get rocked. He gives up lots of hard contact. The Padres definitely do provide said hard contact as well, but I think it is within Heaney's range of outcomes to be the highest scoring pitcher on this slate. So I'm going to put him second behind Clayton Kershaw. $8,500 gives you a lot of flexibility with your batters. So Kershaw is going to be number one. He is number two. With that said, I think it's really all about Kershaw for tonight. So again, I think it's a great night to play a single entry tournament, plug Kershaw into the pitcher, figure out your stacks. 10-9 is not prohibitive from a salary perspective at pitcher. So Clayton Kershaw, the number one guy on this main slate. Pitching is pretty easy for me to figure out because it's just Kershaw. Stacking, not as easy because we're trying to go through, try to find some reliable ones. There are a lot of good pitchers on this slate, and a lot of the best offenses are facing good pitchers as well. So I think what we can do here is fall back on our old reliable and stack against the Boston Red Sox. This time it's Martin Perez facing the Blue Jays, and Perez has done a good job of limiting hard contact this year. He has allowed a 37% hard hit rate that is 6 or 5 percentage points better than the league average, but the batted ball numbers or the plate discipline numbers against Perez are pretty rough. He has a 16% strikeout rate and a 10% walk rate. Facing the Blue Jays, and they're not a great offense by any means, but they can hit lefties. They have a 115 WRC plus against them, and most of the guys we want to use within this Jays offense are righties. So we're getting them against the lefty. That is the preferred handedness of pitcher for them to face. And I think that seems to be a pretty good combination, especially when you combine Perez with the fact that the Red Sox bullpen will likely struggle once they come out there. I don't think it is a must to stack the Blue Jays by any means. Their salaries have gotten massive hikes. I would assume there is something in the algorithm now to account for the fact that the Red Sox are tossing out some interesting pitching selections for sure, but I don't think there really are any true no-brainers on this slate. They get to face a lefty. They get to face the Red Sox bullpen. That's good enough for me. So the Blue Jays are number one on my list for tonight. The one value guy who didn't get his salary increased as much as the others was Lourdes Gurriel. He is $2,900. Last time they faced a lefty, Gurriel hit fifth. In his career against lefties, he has a 271 isolated slugging percentage, so much better against lefties and righties. He had a home run last night, and the results have been improving for Gurriel as the season has gone along. I think he can be a focal point here. Randall Grichuk is $3,400. My boy Teoscar Hernandez got his salary jacked way up to $3,900. So if you use Kershaw on the Jays, you got to find a value stack elsewhere. But I think it's a worthwhile endeavor here because the Jays are so good and Kershaw is so good. If you're going Heaney, you got a lot more flexibility. I would say the White Sox and the Dodgers are two teams to consider stacking, but we can't get to their salaries if we're going Kershaw and the Blue Jays. So instead, we want to find a lower salaried stack here, and I think that could be the Kansas City Royals. They're facing Dylan Cease, and Dylan Cease has this electric, exciting arm, and his ERA this year is 3.00. That's very good. It is pretty exciting to see a guy who is this fun to watch doing that well. The downside is that the peripherals are much less favorable. He has a 5.59 skill interactive ERA with an 18% strikeout rate and a 12% walk rate. We've seen Cease allow hard contact 43% of the time, so the peripherals say that 3.00 ERA probably is not going to stick as the sample expands. The counter to that is that Cease has been leaning more on his slider recently. That's a great pitch for him. It's his best pitch by a pretty wide margin. Actually, if you look at some metrics like Pitch Info's pitch values, it's his only good pitch, only above average pitch. But despite leaning on that slider more, we've actually seen some pretty big issues crop up for Cease, specifically walks. His last start was against this very same Royals team, and he went just 4 1/3 innings. He walked 6 batters compared to 5 strikeouts. He allowed just 1 hit, but it was certainly not his best outing, and that 1 hit was a home run. And it also means that this Royals team did just see Cease his last time out. Now they get him in Kansas City as opposed to Chicago, so it's possible Cease could mow them down. Again, that slider's a good pitch, so if you're going to lean on one pitch, it should be that one. But the Royals give us value. They just saw this guy, and the advanced numbers hint at regression for Cease, and I think that makes the Royals a viable stack consideration for tonight. Among the lower salaried hitters here, I think Ryan O'Hearn is the top option for DFS. He got the night off last night, so it's possible he does not go. If he doesn't go, Ryan McBroom, the McBroom stick, will work as a value. I'd assume that he would be in there instead. But O'Hearn has a 53% hard hit rate and a 40% fly ball rate against righties. He does strike out a lot, but when he gets hits, he hits it hard. O'Hearn is $2,400. He can help us when we are trying to get to our Kershaw lineups and trying to get additional Blue Jays. So I think that O'Hearn, again, assuming that he plays because he was off last night, so it's not a given necessarily that he's in there. If he does play, I would say he is a high-quality value option within this Royals team. But it's also like, it's not as if the rest of the team is all that prohibitive. You got Jorge Soler at $3,000. Maikel Franco is $2,700. And I think that stacking the Royals gives us a lot of flexibility. So to me, it's a single entry night. Lock in Clayton Kershaw, pitcher. Don't worry about the rest of the muck that is available on this slate. Check out the Blue Jays, check out the Royals, and see if you can make that work. And I think that should be a pretty profitable way to attack this main slate. With that said, let's transition now into the early-only slate. If you were here for just the main slate, we'll talk to you again tomorrow. But for the early-only slate, there's a decent chance of rain in Pittsburgh for the Pirates and the Cubs. It seems pretty light, so they may be able to play through it, but it's going to be something to monitor for sure, and that's the one concerning weather note here on the early-only slate. It's pretty hot in New York for the Mets and the Yankees. It's at 88 degrees, and that's the warmest on the slate among those I would expect to play outdoors. So I'd upgrade hitters in New York from where they are usually at. Pitching preview for the early-only slate. Right now, it lists Lance McCullers as the probable pitcher for the Astros. I believe that is erroneous. I'm pretty sure it's Zach Greinke. Greinke is $9,900. Lance Lynn is $9,200. Zach Eflin is $9,000. And then Alec Mills is the other pitcher above $8,000 for tonight. And I think that, again, assuming that it is Greinke and not McCullers, I think both the top pitchers on this slate are going to be in the same game. That is Lance Lynn against Greinke, and I like both of them, but for very different reasons. Let's start here with Lynn, because I can see people being skeptical because of the matchup. I like Lynn because of his talent. He is following up what he did last year with another awesome campaign with a 28% strikeout rate so far this year. He is keeping hard contact in check, and we know that Lance Lynn is going to go deep in games. I don't think he's gone fewer than 100 pitches in any start so far this year. So Lynn is the most talented pitcher on this slate, and I feel pretty secure in saying that. The only qualm you can have here is a matchup, and that's a very serious and legitimate qualm. The Astros, though, not as good as they once were against righties. The 21% strikeout rate, that's actually an increase for them. It's a good number, but it's not as good as they were last year. And this is a slate that is also interesting from a strikeout rate perspective. The composition of the slate allows us to target a lower strikeout team because there are 8 total teams on this slate, and only 3 of those 8 teams have strikeout rates higher than 22% against the opposing pitcher's handedness. None of the pitchers in those matchups get strikeouts themselves. So as a result of that, I think we can, to an extent, overlook a low strikeout matchup. The Astros have an 88 or a 98 WRC plus against righties. Alex Bregman's not back yet, so this matchup is not as bad as it seems from a reputation perspective, and Lance Lynn is the best pitcher on this slate. And I think that gives us the wiggle room to plug him in as a top pitcher here. He is $9,200. That is not all that prohibitive, so I think that Lynn, to me at least, a worthy contender for the number one slot, and he will be my number one pitcher for the early-only slate. I'm also willing to consider Greinke on the other side, and that's not as daunting of a matchup. He gets the Rangers. Their active roster has a 69 WRC plus against righties. Very much not nice. They're not striking out as much as you would think because it's a Joey Gallo, Rougned Odor team, but Odor's on the injured list. So the strikeout rate not as high as you think, but they're also just not a good offense. This is a plus spot for Greinke, especially when you consider that there aren't a lot of high strikeout matchups on this slate. Greinke doesn't have the same numbers as Lynn from a strikeout perspective, a 22% strikeout rate this year. His swinging strike rate is 9.9%, so he's not going to blow up in the strikeout department. But he should give you length, and he's someone who could pay off via volume. We've seen Greinke go 94 or more pitches in 4 straight games. He went 106 2 starts ago. 94 is interesting because Zach Eflin is another contender on the slate. He's at a high strikeout rate this year, but he has not gone more than 92 pitches, and Greinke's been above that in 4 straight starts, and his highest is 14 higher than that number. That's why I'd rather find the $900 to get to Greinke. He also has a better matchup than Eflin. The strikeout rate is a huge stat from a DFS perspective. You always want to maximize the expected strikeout rate of your pitcher by combining his with the opposing teams. But the other things matter too. The matchup, the park, and the length all favor Zach Greinke. So I will do the same here and put Zach Greinke number 2 behind Lance Lynn. I'm kind of surprised with how high the salary is on Greinke, but I still think that he is worth that on this slate. Given the matchup, given the park, given the length, I think that he is number 2. So Lynn and Greinke, number 1 and number 2 from the same game for me in that order on this early-only slate. Stacking on the early-only slate is a lot easier to figure out than the pitchers, and I think there are 2 really good stacks, and I'm focused on those here. The first one, and the one I prefer, is the Phillies. They're facing Anibal Sanchez. Sanchez hasn't been able to duplicate what he did the past 2 seasons. Both the results and the peripherals are falling behind. His ERA is 6.90. His skill interactive ERA is 5.07. And the reason that the skill interactive ERA is so low is because Sanchez does not get strikeouts. The strikeout rate is 17%. The reason he had a good ERA last year and outperformed his peripherals is that he limited hard contact. That's the big reason things have slid the wrong direction this year, is because Sanchez is no longer doing that. His hard hit rate allowed is 43%. That is higher than the league average. And the last 2 years, he was much better than the league average in that department. When the results and the peripherals align like this, it is hard to envision things really turning around. And I think that means our interest in the Phillies should be very high, and they are my number 1 stack of the early-only slate. We don't need as many salary savings here as we did with the other slate because Lynn is 92, whereas Kershaw was 10.9, but we do get some salary savings here if you want it via Jay Bruce, Didi Gregorius, Gene Segura. Among the studs, I would rank Bryce Harper first. I would go Rhys Hoskins, who is just lighting things up recently, second. JT Realmuto would be third for me, and I feel pretty good about that order. So Harper, Hoskins, Realmuto among the studs, and we should be able to make this Phillies offense work pretty easily for us, even when using Lynn as our pitcher. The other stack I want to target here is the Mets, and this one may seem less obvious because they're facing Jay Happ, and Happ just faced the Mets his last time out, and he crushed them. He went 7 innings and allowed no runs on 3 hits. He had 5 strikeouts compared to no walks. So why on earth would we go to the Mets now? Happ did change things up in that start, which is very interesting because he leaned more on his sinker, and that helped him generate more soft contact, and that's interesting. But the peripherals in the other starts this year have been so bad that I struggle to believe that Happ just magically turned things around by making that one relatively minor tweak. We also won't see Happ super rested this time because he went a pretty long time between starts. I think it was 13 days between starts. That will not be in his favor this time around. And this Mets team did just see him. They should have a better game plan for counter-striking against that sinker for today. It also does not hurt that the Mets just added Todd Frazier at the trade deadline. The one thing Frazier can still kind of do is pound lefties. He was not there the first time that they faced Happ. I think that's actually a noteworthy addition when it comes to them facing lefties. Once you add Frazier to the active roster, their active roster has a 113 WRC plus against lefties. So they're an above average team. They're not bad. And they may have just had a bad day the last time that they saw Happ. I'm willing to bet they fare better this time around. So I think the Mets are a deserved number 2 stack behind the Phillies. If you want some alternatives here, I think the Cubs are a good play if that game is allowed to play despite the rain. And I also don't mind the Yankees against Robert Gsellman. So stacking easier on the early-only slate than it is in the main slate, and it's a lot easier than the pitching on the early-only slate as well. That is all the time that we have for today, though. It's always fun to get these split slate podcasts in, talk about 4 different pitchers. I always enjoy that, so definitely a blast. We have the small slate coming up for the main slate, so make sure you tune in at 4 p.m. Eastern time today to check out our Q&A, our FanDuel Fantasy Q&A, getting you set for that main slate, talking pitchers, stacks, one-offs, process, whatever you want. We will discuss it today at 4 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. Make sure you are subscribed to those places if you are not already. As mentioned as well, make sure you check out the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed to get UFC, PGA, MLB, NBA, and NHL podcasts, a NASCAR podcast coming later today as well. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for one of the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. If you have any questions for me prior to 4 p.m., I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Good luck to all of you on both the early only and the main slates, and we'll talk to you once again tomorrow. This has been the solo shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.